Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Today we conclude Schlocktober with Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddie's Revenge, the surprisingly homoerotic follow-up to the legendary slasher staple. Please be advised, spoilers are ahead.
Welcome, everybody, to Schlocktober.
Schlocktober.
Or at least, for the first few episodes
At least you didn't say
month.
Schlongtober.
For the first few episodes this month, we're probably gonna... It's Schlocktober. We're gonna be looking at some goofier movies, it's Halloween. Everyone's excited. Are you a big Halloween person?
I'm a big Halloween fan. It took me a while to come around to, the more of, the horror side of it. Because when I was younger, I was really into cute Halloween. Where you have the smiling ghost and all that stuff, which I still kind of prefer as far as the way I decorate. But I've learned, to really appreciate, movies like the one we're going to discuss today.
So, as our new editor, Pat Mars, with his velvety smooth voice, told you, we're looking at Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, why did I pick this? Because it's weird, man.
Lost a bet.
This is so Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my favorite series, but this movie, no one talks about it to the extent I feel like it should be talked about because it is a very strange entry.
Well, yeah,
what was your initial reaction to it after watching?
At first I'm very ambivalent about this. Because
was there anything about it that jumped out to you? There's a reason I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. First off, the homophobia of this movie totally jumped out to me.
Okay, so that actually... Okay, story time. So
yeah.
I actually,
Story time with whiskey.
I lived with some roommates in college, and we were all kind of sharing our interests. Well, we were sharing our interests with each other, and obviously I'm a big horror guy, so eventually we were planning on marathoning these movies. Mm-hmm. And I had watched this for the first time. I'd never seen the first movie in high school, and a friend of mine had the whole series, all 7 movies, so I marathoned them over a weekend. And the thing about marathoning movies is that they blend together, so you kind of forget the details of each one. So when we got to this one in college, I was like, I didn't think homophobic, I thought homoerotic. And we'll get into this, but I was just like, this is a weird movie.
There was a scene towards the beginning of it, I think when he first comes face to face with Freddy Krueger, and he just kind of just caresses his face.
Oh, there's a story. Okay, so
I can see some of the homoeroticism.
So
of that.
If you clicked on this without having seen the movie, this might all kind of be like, what? If you have seen this movie, you probably are not you're telling me how did you not notice this the first time you watched it? Noticed it the second time. My friends and I were kind of we just thought it was good fun, the whole thing. But the whole time I was like, is the director gay or something? Because it feels sort of. So I did not research because I had better things to do with my time, homework and stuff in college. But this time I was okay, I actually want to know what the story is. So I am not the only one who has found this. There's a BuzzFeed article about it. I have
BuzzFeed's credible.
I've got a good couple of notes from an interview with the writer from Bloody Good Horror. But so no, it was not it was intentional. Although, anyway, so the movie came out in 1985, only a year after the first one, did bonkers well at the box office. $3 million budget, $30 million gross. Came out on November 1st, which is stupid because why would you miss Halloween?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Director's Jack Shoulder, who would go on to do 1987's The Hidden, which, if you haven't seen that, it's an interesting, alien buddy cop movie.
Okay, that just sounds hilarious. I want to see this now.
It's really... So, yeah... Well, maybe that'll be a review. It's a little bit more...
This isn't the movie with the guy who has the glasses so he can see which people are aliens and which people aren't.
No, that is They Live. No, this is...
okay.
So
I don't know why that popped in my head.
We won't talk about The Hidden. That could be a future review. It's a weird kind of hidden gem. But anyway, so that's what Jack Shoulder would go on to do. David Chaskin was the writer. And he actually doesn't have a lot of writing credits, but strangely, and I'm kind of wondering where this goes, but he was in the camera and electrical department for the film was called Movie Buffs, and it made it to the Hollywood Erotic Film Festival.
Oh, okay. Gee, I wonder what kind of movie buffs they were referring to.
Yeah, so that's a little eyebrow raising. So this movie actually got a little bit of backlash at the time and a little bit of
What?
love.
I'm shocked.
The director just straight up said he didn't notice any homoerotic anything in the movie.
He's in denial.
Yeah, but Chaskin, like, just denied it for, like, years until, like, recently, like, within the last few years. So in an interview with Bloody Good Horror that they didn't post the date, so I don't know when, but they did an interview with David Chaskin, and so he kind of elaborated on things, like, with the movie. But anyway, so at the time, David Chaskin was just working at New Line Cinema, and New Line Cinema nowadays is huge because of things like Lord of the Rings. But in the '80s, it was they were like the schlock kings. Like they just released like straight to video like bad horror movies, and one of their biggest hits was Night on Elm Street, to the point where they didn't even know it was going to be as popular as it was. Like it was just like, oh wow, this is popular. Okay, let's milk it for all it's worth.
I have a story time about that. So I was having a conversation with my mother. I was like, oh yeah, that's what we're talking about. And she was like, oh, I remember when I saw the first one. I'm like, you went and saw the first one because she's not a horror person. She's like, yeah, some friend dragged me to it or talked me into it. And she was just very negative about it. Like, Mom, are you just being negative because it scared you? She's like, yeah.
Gotta be objective.
You gotta be objective.
I understand. But anyway, so like he was talking about how he would write scripts in his free time, and people at New Line were aware of it. So the head of distribution at New Line, Stanley Duddleson, eventually, like, he came up to him at work and was like, Chaskin, you think you could write a sequel to this piece of shit?
Oh my God, that's horrible.
that's how they were looking at the original. Even though, and Wes Craven, the director of the original, he's like a superhero these days. But at the time, he had a few hits, but like he didn't even think.
Where is that New Line guy today? Exactly.
Right. So he was down to do it. It had to be cheap to make. And as I said, like, the original was a surprise hit, so he had a lot of, like, freedom with where to take it. So it's funny you say homophobic, because that actually was his intention.
He intended it to be homophobic?
So what his thing is, like, because people say homoerotic, but he was, like, thinking about the sort of things that would frighten the demographic. And a lot of the demographic of horror fans in the 80s were, like, bros. So he was, like, what is the sort of thing that would like appear in their nightmares, right? Like these dude bros who are like super. So he was like, well, what about questioning their sexuality?
See, I didn't get the opinion that the guy was questioning his sexuality.
He spends more time doing like shirtless push-ups with like his gym buddy.
I mean, there was the whole thing that actually happens in gyms.
There was the whole S&M bar thing that was like very.
See, that's like there's that, and then they had the blatant, essentially. If you really think about it, he gets tied in the shower, which is essentially basically creating an execution layout, and then we have this character essentially be executed. And of course, it's the only time really that you see a gay character in this movie. And that really kind of does play into the trope, which even Brokeback Mountain has a problem with, of bury your gays, where essentially it's okay to have them as characters as long as, they basically end up dead or miserable. And so that's kind of like why I said the homophobia of this movie is because, I know it was the 80s, but it was just like, okay, it's cool. If that had just been a cool, interesting side thing of the coach or whatever, that he was at this leather bar, like hanging out, that would be fine. But it's the fact that they confirmed that in the same 5 minutes that they execute him is what I was just like, really?
It's very, like, I understand where you're coming from. Like, from someone who watches these, you don't... It's strange, like, with slasher movies, because pretty much the only, like, rounded character in any of these movies is the main character.
Yeah.
So, like, you don't really think too hard about it with these other characters. And the coach was kind of, like, sadistic, so it's sort of like...
But see, they said he was... you don't really see him being sadistic. Like... He just literally looked like he just had this, he did the typical, like, gym punishments that every gym class has. There was nothing about his punishments I thought were over the top or really sadistic. I don't think the punishment that they did in gym class, where they basically had to sit there in the pushed up position.
I don't think he deserved to die, but I will say I never had to stay like 3 hours after school in a plank position, so that's a little much. It's not important, but yeah, so like that was a thing.
Wait, back at this time, did they still have physical punishment in schools, or was this post that?
80s, I think they still did. It was a pretty conservative era, so like I think like probably
you wouldn't
not
think that seeing the hair that came out of that time.
Probably not like corporal punishment was probably getting. It depended on where you were.
Like,
you know what I mean?
Like maybe it was on its way out at this time.
Yeah, and I'm thinking this probably took place in like the Midwest. I think like in the South, corporal punishment was probably still a big thing in the 80s, but I don't know. I was not alive in the 80s, and I also am not from the South.
What? But, Whiskey, you're not aged with perfection?
But so like Chaskin wanted to kind of like he didn't want to like hate on gay people. He just kind of wanted to like scare the bro people who like come to the movie.
I mean, I'm a fan of that. I feel like that would have been more effective if they hadn't essentially executed the one gay character, the same essential scene that he comes out in.
But according to him, he thought that like sort of questioning their sexuality, like, or you know, making that sort of the nightmare-ish sort of scenario in this was a slam dunk in his words. And I do think it, again, like seeing it the second time when I wasn't marathoning the movies back to back, it wasn't just like the sweaty shirtless guys. It was also, you know, because of like Freddie like trying to like be reborn through his body. There's like that sort of metaphor in the movie where it's like, oh, what am I becoming kind of thing, where it's like, it almost, you could think of it as like, maybe a little bit about like you changing bodies, you become an adult or something, but there is sort of that. Okay. There is sort of that not understanding.
It's essentially it's an allegory for puberty, kind of.
And the other reason this jumps out as like homoerotic to a lot of people at the time was there was
the amount of times that kid wakes up in his underwear. And we get sweaty, full body, and it looked like it did look like there was a little package stuffing in there too.
You're also forgetting the little cleanup dance he's doing when he's cleaning his room.
Oh my god, yes! I was. What is this?
See, like
this
with a lot of
uncomfortable to look at.
Well, and the pop gun that goes off, like in that. Yeah, so like this is the thing, and this is why I think it was a lot more obvious to a lot of like moviegoers at the time, and certainly me and my college friends, is like in the 80s, especially with horror movies, it's very male gaze oriented. There's lots of like naked women, or you know.
Yeah, I will say that
you do not get that in this movie. The closest you get is like the pool party at the end. Yeah, but otherwise it's mostly focused on him.
And I will say, yeah, that's true. Actually, now that you didn't notice that there wasn't. I'm used to seeing in like a lot of these 80s movies what they refer to as TNA.
Yes,
and that was basically all bare-chested males and underwear-clad males, or bare male butts that are being spanked.
The other kind of interesting element of this that, again, people kind of picked up as being homoerotic is, so like, unlike a lot of movies where it's like, oh, I want to date the popular girl or whatever, with like the teen boy, you know, people, he's already got a girlfriend. She's already like well connected, and she wants him badly. You know, like any time, even when he's embarrassing himself with his cleanup dance, she's just like,
well,
trying to get into his pants. I will
say that is a positive portrayal of female sexuality.
She's good.
That is kind of brushed over in a lot of these movies.
Out of this whole series, I think she's kind of underrated, that actress and everything. I think sometimes when she's like, no, don't shoot him, I think she's an idiot. Oh. Oh, we'll get into some, because I'm going to talk about some of my schlocky favorite parts in a sec. But yeah, like that's another thing that people point out during the pool party. They're about to have sex, and he just kind of pushes her off, and he's like, there's like changes going on in my body, and all you want to do is have sex with me. Again, nothing wrong with that, but for moviegoers at the time, it was definitely not what they were used to, and it was kind of like, oh wow, this is kind of. And then of course immediately after that scene, he goes to his friend's house where he's sweaty in his underpants, like chilling in his room. He's like, bro, what are you doing in here? Bro, there's a guy trying to kill you. You know, it's like it's
no, well, I will say I brought up that scene when that character's death, and I will say what I did like is both the male characters. It really does kind of put like typical masculinity on just under a microscope. Both those characters, the main character and his friend, who are supposed to be kind of, you know, like macho, like males, they both, when they're scared, they both call for their parents. And I did think that, I did remember thinking that's like a super, very clever thing to do, because that's usually something you see for the most part, like female characters do back then when this sort of thing, of course. So I did sort of like that level of kind of, it's basically kind of like revealing that this is a front for them. And, you know, they're really very infantile, you know, when push comes to shove. So I did appreciate that.
Absolutely. The other kind of thing that I think goes into the whole, like, questioning your sexuality sort of thing is, like, the father to our protagonist is, like, comically... I even wrote this down. Like adversarial to his son.
I know. It's like, what is this guy's deal?
To the point where you almost think he's crazy.
Yes, somebody was murdered in the house across the street. So what?
We got a good price on the house. I know. No, and my favorite.
The first thing I thought of was there was this kind of sort of documentary show that was, I think it was either on History or A&E or Travel at some point, called My Ghost Story. And I remember there was one episode that starts with, "My ghost story started when I moved into a house where 8 people were axed to death."
But we got a good price on the house.
But I know, right? It's like, my dad said that because I watched another show that used to be on Discovery called A Haunting, and that was like,
that's a great show.
That's a great show. I have all of it on DVD actually. And he was like, and my dad was like, every episode's the same. The first thing is there's like, oh, they get a great deal on a house and they're not sure why.
Dad's not wrong. But no, like in this movie, a bird starts attacking the family, and he like turns to the son. He's like, "What did you do?" What? I know. It's like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
He personally hypnotized the bird.
The toaster explodes. What? Did this come some kind of practical joke to you? It's like, but anyway, like I feel like that kind of has to do again now, especially that the writers come out and said yes, this was intentional. I feel like that's almost kind of like the father not understanding his own son kind of thing. Like I can't speak on this, but I know that's a dynamic that some gay people have with their fathers.
I can speak on this, and yes, it is. A lot of times, it is this understanding, and it can go two ways. It can either continue this way, where this guy is just adversarial and refusing to understand. I was lucky in the case to where it was my doctor and I did research, and he learned about it, and super chill.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing. I think also, like, for the time period, I don't think people were as open about it.
Well, they also didn't have the internet either, so they couldn't. They couldn't just be like, how to raise your gay child.
For sure. But yeah, so that's another thing that is very quirky about this movie, especially, again, compared to the other Nightmare movies. The parents usually don't listen to their kids, but this dad in this movie is like something else. I
thought it was so funny when he comes back, "Tell me now, I have a couple questions.
What drugs are you on?
What are you on, and who did you get it from?" I'm like, really? That's the first question you ask?
Shows up the cops. The cops don't seem to care that he showed up, like, naked at his high school. And they're like, oh, hey, your silly son, he was naked at the high school. Here you are.
Yeah.
Son, what drugs are you on?
I also love that that's what they say, and then nobody makes a connection to, oh, also that night, somebody was murdered and naked in the school also.
So the other thing, before, like, when this debuted in New York in 1985, it actually did get a rave review from a more left-leaning newspaper called The Advocate that called it...
Oh, The Advocate, I love that.
And they called it the gayest slasher film. So, like, they liked it, and that actually, I think,
actually, if I think about it, when that coach brings him back to clean up at the shower, I don't think he brought him back in a creepy manner. I think it's more like, okay, we're going to have a conversation. I think basically he was supposed to be, if things worked out, a supportive person, because he sees the kid at the bar, so he assumes he's having these feelings too, and then
you're too young to drink. That'll be 100 laps.
Yeah, but
shower off.
Yeah, but I still think he was supposed to be. The idea was that he would be a supportive, tough but supportive, character to this other character, and I think maybe Freddie figured that, and maybe I'm changing my opinion. Maybe I think Freddie knew that. And that's why he took him out, not because necessarily he was gay, but because he would have been a supportive person. I don't know.
Well, we'll get more into this when I'm talking more about the fun stuff, but at least as far as the homoeroticism angle, it was the second movie in the series, and one thing that just got expanded on as the series went on was giving Freddie a personality. And Robert Englund is the best. He's so good as Freddie, especially
Freddie
in the later...
in this movie was so sassy. I love it.
That's the thing. He wasn't really... He was kind of like that in the first movie, but it's played down because it was like a first movie. He only gets sassier as the series goes on.
Well, you know, I think this makes it... Because like I said, I've never seen these before, but I know there was a video, I think it went viral on YouTube like a while ago, where it's like if horror movies were like... If you went to like a horror movie high school or something, and so they have all like the villains as high schoolers, and if I remember correctly, Freddy Krueger is very, very flamboyant and sassy.
he's like, so if anyone who's listening hasn't seen these movies, Freddy basically becomes like Bugs Bunny as he's killing teenagers, but the teenagers are written to be unlikable, so you don't really care. Yeah. And he always has some one-liner, you know, like, welcome to prime time, bitch, or like, you know, other things, like whenever, like before he kills them, and he becomes like the star of the show.
Right.
But so like this was when Robert Englund was really rolling with that, and when, you know, he was told about kind of the theme of, you know, sexuality and stuff. You mentioned his claw. There is a take that wasn't used where Robert Englund did put his claw in his mouth. And the director was like, "Nope, too much." But which again doesn't make it.
Did he just put the claw in his mouth, or was he simulating his things with the claw?
So like it was supposed to be like kind of sexual because like in the movie he's just stroking his face, but again he was told to be very like erotic, like coming on to the kids. So he did like in one of the takes like put the claw in his mouth, like as like a.
That just sounds like that would have been painful.
Kind of yeah, they didn't go with that. The director said, "Nope, too much."
Too much. That's too on the nose.
Which also just makes me think the director's lying again, because it's like if you know
especially
that it needs to be erotic, like
yes, you're telling your actor that you want this scene to be erotic and they should act erotic, and okay, yeah.
Like I
don't. It's like when Elton John sued all those British papers that called him gay before he came out.
I don't believe it for a second. I think it was Chaskin's idea, but I am sure the director was aware of the tone and like anyway. So that was something that happened. BuzzFeed did a 2016 article.
That's I love them.
It's pretty good, but it's basically talking about like I think they even title it like the gayest horror movie ever made or whatever. But it's just talking about how Chaskin was feigning ignorance, which he full-on admits, at least by that year. I don't know when the Bloody Good Horror interview happened, but at least on BuzzFeed, it's like 2016. So we know by then he'd come out and said, yes, this was supposed to be or at least I wrote it to be sort of homophobic, like as a way of kind of, you know, dunking on these stupid people these stupid bros who go to the movie or whatever. And it's a good article. I didn't really like delve too deep into it because we're talking more about the movie, but the actor who starred in the movie goes into his experience of being called slurs like after the movie came out and all this other stuff. And I think he actually is gay in real life. I might be wrong. I kind of skimmed the article besides the Chaskin stuff, but it was a good article.
But which actor, the one who played
the main character?
The main character. Okay, I was supposed to say the Freddy Krueger one or the main.
Yeah, no. So it's a good article. We're more talking about the movie rather than the actor on this podcast,
right, yeah.
But like it's a good article. I don't often praise BuzzFeed, but when they do put something out, I will say like that's a good article. Check it out.
I have trouble praising anything that has a whole slew of videos of why I left this company all over YouTube.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's pretty much it as far as like the homoeroticism, you know, that Chaskin was wanting to talk about. But there's so much in this movie, and it is goofy fun. Like even if you're not into that, it's just a lot of fun. But I will say, I you know, a few years ago, the Babadook was kind of like a horror icon for Pride.
But that happened on accident.
It happened as like a joke, and then everyone decided to like do it.
Well, because Netflix accidentally coded it as a Pride movie. So every time you looked up LGBT themed movies, it came up, and then that's when everybody started posting all these just like memes of just the Babadook being like, "Hey, Queen." Well,
unlike that movie, this is actually kind of you know, I think that more LGBT people should check this movie out because
I just wish the only character who was specifically, I wish they hadn't killed him. I do feel like that kind of sets him back. That does set the movie back a bit. I mean, they could have. I mean, they could have done something different where he was just, horribly terrified or something. The fact that he was killed really bugs me in the same scene. It's like we just found out he was gay, and then this is the answer. It's kind of just, it's almost like and whether or not this was probably not, but it gives the impression that he deserved to die because we now know this about his life. Like you talk about the teenagers, you don't care about them being killed because they're unlikable. It's kind of like, we just found out that he's gay, and then he's dead 3 seconds later. It kind of just equates to thinking that's the only thing I have a problem with.
I think in today's world, like, it definitely is not as good as it was back in the 80s. And that's it's true. I think, like, for people who are into these kinds of movies, it won't come off as offensive because tons of, like, secondary characters who aren't necessarily evil. Mm-hmm. I think, and that's the thing too. I think the way the Coach was written was to be kind of mean, not necessarily abusive or something, but it's kind of like, like in the first movie, one of the characters to get killed off is a biker, like leather jacket and stuff, and he's got his girlfriend, and he's a jerk, but he's not evil. You know what I mean? Like, he's like, you dumb broads, but he's not like actively like, assaulting women or something. Right, so it's kind of the same thing. And and that's like the deal with slasher movies is like, even when the characters aren't bad people, they're written to be kind of flawed. But I totally get what you mean, because he is the only openly gay character in the movie.
It's like I said, it's also because it was coupled immediately with he basically comes out, and then like within 60 seconds he's brutally murdered in his shower.
Yeah.
Although
the way he's murdered is kind of funny. I have to admit, he's rat-tailed to death.
No, he's not rat-tailed to death. He's rat-tailed, and then he pulls out the claws.
And then he pulls out the claws, but he takes balls to the face. Then he gets tied down.
I never picked up on that.
Then he takes a hot shower while getting rat-tailed, and then the claws come out.
So
it's like very like S&M until the actual like Freddie claws
but that's also, if you really think about that, it's equating, the LGBT lifestyle with at the time was considered, it's not obscure. The word I'm looking for is not obscure. It's with like deviant sexuality, like you talk about with BDSM. That's, even today, it's more accepted. Even today, it's still kind of considered sort of deviant sexual, not to the point it was back then. But like I said, it was sort of those things. Like, I understand where he was going with it. It's just the message that came across because of the order of events. Like I just said, if they just separated the coming out and that, I would have had less of a problem with it.
The other interesting thing about that scene, and you're not privy to this because you're new to the series, but so Freddie can only kill you if you're sleeping. So that would suggest that the boy was sleepwalking, but then, like, the Coach had to be asleep somehow.
Yeah.
Like, because, like, for instance, when the bird attacks, it's because the bird went to sleep, because they put the thing over the cage, so the bird's asleep. Uh-huh. Bird gets possessed by Freddie. Now the bird is Freddie, and the bird's attacking. But that's the rules of the series. You have to be asleep somehow. So I do think that it plays into the theme of the homoeroticism angle, because it's subconscious. He's not even aware of his sexual desires.
Like they were sleeping together?
Or like he's unaware of his sexual desires. But like that's the whole thing that's still kind of unclear to me, is whether they actually were at the gym. Like it's clear enough that he was sleepwalking because he, is out in his boxers in the middle of town.
Yeah.
Cops pick him up. But for the like, Freddie can't just will himself into existence.
And he doesn't kill the cops because they're not asleep.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, Freddie can't just will himself into existence. That's also why when he's trying to be, like, reborn through this kid, the kid has to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the whole thing with Freddie. If you've never seen the series, you're safe if you don't go to sleep. So that's the other kind of interesting angle with the whole gym scene, because it's like, well, wait a second, are they both sleeping? Or are they even at the gym? Like, it's a little unclear. And maybe also Chaskin probably wasn't trying very hard, because at this point he was writing his sequel to a quote-unquote piece of shit. So maybe he wasn't thinking too hard about it. But I will say I like the sleepwalking angle, at least as far as it being kind of like a metaphor for him not being aware.
I didn't know that. So now that whole scene now makes me uncomfortable, because now the idea is that this incredibly older man is possibly sleeping with this underage kid who is also his student.
And that's the thing.
And now again that I don't know that now it makes it worse. That's now part of the canon is that you have to be asleep.
Yeah, right. But anyway, off of that subject, I just want to talk about some fun things I like about the movie. First of all, Freddie's personality, he's very sassy. I love the opening scene. And the closing scene.
Wait, hold on.
The school bus to hell is like the freaking goofiest thing I've ever.
I had no idea. I'm like, what is happening here?
Right? It's so silly. It's so ridiculous, and it's also like if you're paying attention and you're a fan of the series, you can tell before he turns into Freddy that it's David England. Like there's one little shot where he's closing the door after letting some kids out, and you can see his face. So, like, you would probably pick up on that if you're a fan. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I love how creative that is. And, again, like, going with the series on and on, like, Freddie gets way more creative with how he, like...
When I was in middle school, that scene probably would have scared me because I remember it's one of the books that we read in English class when I was in middle school was, and you heard of the author Lois Duncan?
Yeah.
Teen horror, that was a girl thing.
Yeah,
she wrote a book called... Well, originally it was called Five Were Missing. Now it's called Ransom. It's essentially about these kids who were on a who basically this bus their school bus route takes them through all these neighborhoods, and the last stop is the kids with the who live in the rich neighborhood. So they were being taken ransom. So the whole bus is just abducted. The last 5 kids of the bus are abducted. They take the bus to this place near the border. Because I had this crippling fear of being kidnapped on the way from school. And actually, if you talk to my mom, she'll be like, yeah, there was this whole rash period where it's like for 4 weeks, you kept calling me to come pick you up from school, claiming you missed the bus. And it's because I had this fear of being kidnapped from the bus. So I'm like, if I'd seen this when I was in middle school, that scene would have probably freaked me out a whole lot more than it did now.
Oh yeah. No, but I love. It was very creative. Like I loved the miniature model and just the idea of the bus hanging off,
just teetering on the thing,
and it just keeps collapsing under. And that too, at the end of the opening scene where he's walking towards them, and it's if they back up too much, the bus will fall off. But he's coming with his claws.
Yeah,
and
but
stuff.
But ironically, wouldn't that also kill Freddie?
Nah, because he can control everything. He can make it so he can fly last minute or whatever.
Well, that's rude.
It's nuts, man.
He doesn't have any rules. He has no respect for the rules.
At least while you're asleep, he can do whatever he wants.
Wait, does this mean that the spirit of Freddie is always asleep?
Okay, so the background, because they don't really explain it too much in this movie. So what Freddie is he was a child murderer who, as one is, who lived in, and whoever is the main character in every one of the movies is living in Freddie's old house. So that's why,
haven't these people figured out at some point, they figured this out with even American Horror Story, they can't have the same thing take place in the same house again and again and again and again.
It was the 80s, baby. No, but, so the deal is that Freddie, he kept killing these kids, and he was arrested, and there wasn't enough proof, so he got off. So
how was there not enough proof? The guy literally has a claw for a hand.
So the parents basically ganged together and lynched him by burning him alive.
Oh, please tell me that Freddie was not black in real life.
No, he's
God. That would have been too much.
No. And I mean, lynching is basically just mob justice, no matter what. But anyway, so they burn him alive. So the first movie is he is going after the not ancestors. It's the kids. When this happened, the teenagers in the first movie were in elementary school. They were the kids he was targeting. So it's been 10 years they're in high school. Mm-hmm. But that's why he's targeting them.
Those extra 7 years were for nothing.
It's the kids of the parents who killed him, and he's taking his revenge. So that's Freddie. So as far as why he can do it in dreams, it's not explained until the 6th movie, and the explanation is the stupidest thing ever. Anyway, that's just the thing. He can, for some reason, he's in the dream world, and he can do whatever he wants. He can do all sorts of goofy stuff. The third one, there's a bit more of them fighting back. It's called Dream Warriors because they learn that they can give themselves superheroes in the dream world.
Because they're in a dream where anything can happen.
Exactly. So that one's a little bit more fun as far as like them fighting back and stuff. But that's, so since you don't know, that's what Freddy is. Which is also why
low key, I learned that when I was like 5 when I watched Blue's Clues. They had a whole episode about nightmares, and they had this whole song about, it's my dream and I can change it if I want it.
Oh my god. Other fun scene, at least for me, that pool party when Freddy like has been like popped out. That, all of that too, by the way, the special effects, like where he's like screaming and he opens his mouth and you see Freddy's eye inside of him. That was so cool, and him like
I will say the effects in this, they didn't, and what I like about this is another good instance of where I feel like the effects did age well.
The only one that didn't was when he goes to the boiler, like the power plant, and there are dogs with Halloween masks on.
Well,
do you remember that, where it's like a human face, but it's supposed to be like
for the most part they were good.
That's the only effect where it's pretty funny, and you can tell because they only have like less than a second of the dogs as much, like when there's never a close up or whatever. But I thought that was pretty funny. But for the effects have aged well. The whole bit where Freddy like comes out of him almost like he's like a cocoon or something is pretty gnarly. But the pool scene is, I don't know what you thought. I thought it was so goofy, just this this like thing.
But see, here's the thing that I'm confused about again with that pool scene. He can only kill you if you're asleep, so they're all asleep?
At least in this movie, so the guy fell asleep and like he did his thing, so he was able to like come out into the real world. This movie breaks some of the rules sometimes. It's, as I said, it's the weird one out of all of the movies. Besides the 6th one, it's like the weirdest one. So at least for that, it's like he's back in reality. He's like super powerful, and he can do what he wants. But I just thought it was so silly how like the bit where the kids are like, "We're not gonna hurt you."
I know that poor guy. I mean, but it's funny, but at the same time, it's also, well, then again, I watch a lot of like hostage documentaries and stuff. That is a very normal reaction in the situation, because you try to reason, and so. While it's ridiculous watching in this context, because I am weird and I bring reality into movies, I'm like, that is totally something I could see actually happening and be like a logical thing to do.
I also love that pool party was like so strangely wholesome for like an 80s, but like there's the dad. Oh, and that too.
Oh,
like, so the dad's like cooking stuff, but the sex thing where it's like they turn off the lights and everyone's like, yeah, and it's like they can hear you guys.
I know. I was gonna say that. I was like, you need to wait like at least a good hour for them to fall asleep or whatever.
So ridiculous. Well, it's like the parents know what's about to happen. Well, it's just going to turn into a depraved...
depraved... Well, and even the depraved thing wasn't that bad. It was just people being loud in the pool.
This movie's pretty PG as far as the teen antics.
I have always appreciated that, because one of the reasons why I've never really gotten on board with the whole coming of age movie genre. It was just because I'm just like, that was not my experience at all.
Should have had more fun, man.
Apparently, but I appreciate that. But one of the things I did like, and this has always been something I've always talked about with horror films, they seem to focus a lot on teens being the protagonists of the movie, and usually high school teens. And what I've always thought of, I'm like, you guys do realize a majority of high schoolers are technically children. I mean, if they're not 18, they are legally children. And so what I thought was interesting, again, I talked previously about the infantile behavior of they're supposed to be really tough guys in the movie. But what I also liked about that is it really does kind of drive home the fact that, at the end of the day, they are still just literally kids. They're children. And I do feel like that's something that's, and I think also by having the lamest party ever at the pool, I also really think kind of brings that point home too, is that these are just kids. They don't know what they're doing. They're not mature enough to really, make major decisions or about a thing. I think that's also illustrated by the chick being like, "Don't shoot him, I love him," even though he's totally a depraved killer. It's just I've never really seen a horror film really kind of just acknowledge that aspect of their teen protagonist. The fact that they are just, at the end of the day, kids.
A lot of slasher movies are pretty good about that. In this movie, I actually like the protagonist a lot, because even though he's a man, he's kind of written the same way the female protagonists are in a lot of slasher movies, where he's not super macho or anything like that. Like he's a guy, but he's not like Freddie better not try and take my body, because I'll just kick his butt.
I'll kick his butt. Like I think his friend was kind of like.
His friend was pretty macho, but
his friend was his friend really asleep? Were they sleeping together?
Again, I mean, like, so his girlfriend doesn't understand his feelings, so he goes to confess them to his friend, wink.
And they have
while he's in bed, wink.
And basically naked, wink. And so,
whoa, you're sweaty in your underwear too? I'm the same way when I sleep.
I'm the same day when I sleep. So, okay, so looking at it this way, then, so if we think about it this way, if those two people, if they were both asleep, then, you know, we essentially have the main character. Now, when you think about it that way, now I can kind of see the whole questioning of the sexuality thing. He not only is, you know, has his girlfriend, he's also essentially sleeps with his coach and then sleeps with his best friend. I mean, because if you go by the rule, I mean, unless...
No wonder his girlfriend's mad. He's sleeping with everyone but her.
Everyone but her. He can't get it up for her, unfortunately.
It's okay, girl. It's not your fault.
It's not your fault, although that was the weirdest scene ever when he has Freddie's tongue.
So that's kind of a callback in the first movie. Actually, I'm not going to spoil it for you. You should watch the first one. It
literally looked like he was like rubbing like just some old like liver like on her chest. It was just I'm like, oh, that's just gross.
It's a callback.
It wasn't even scary. That's just gross.
It's a callback from the first movie, but I won't. You should just see it. But Freddie's tongue is iconic. With how gross it is,
especially when we're discussing it in a homoerotic sense. Especially if you think about in that first scene, I'm surprised he didn't like go and just like lick the guy's face too after he stroked it. Just like, anyway, but yeah, the tongue kind of.
Freddie doesn't like guys. He's just into kids.
He's just okay. Well, I mean, that was his previous role basically.
So Michael Bay did a remake of Nightmare on Elm Street, and people were like mad because they full on made Freddy Krueger a predator, and it was
but he was a predator.
Like, dude, he's like really like that's the line.
I do think that is very telling of, you know, at least society that line does exist between there being, you know, the character being a predator or just a child killer.
Yeah, well, and again, slasher movies, yes, it's a lot of teenagers dying, but there's like rules in the genre, and again, with what you were saying about like teenagers being kids and stuff, there is sort of a through line with that with a lot of these movies. Like another really popular schlocky kind of series that maybe we'll cover next year, who knows, but the Friday the 13th series is kind of interesting too, because you have these teenagers in a authoritarian role as camp counselors. So they are kids that have to look after kids while being kids themselves.
Yeah,
while there's a masked killer. So like there's that, plus there's like the whole reason like Jason's mad.
I think either you told me why he was mad or somebody did, but I know the reason. We'll get into that later. But yeah, again,
he's a different kind of.
He's the original incel.
Well. Not exactly.
I know he's not.
So he was not old enough to care about what was. He was basically a special needs kid.
Yeah,
who was drowning.
He was drowning, and the counselors were too busy, you know, playing hide the cannoli.
Exactly. So I don't know if incel's the right word. Well, I think he's more just mad that they were like too busy
canoodling.
Well, and I think like that's the thing too. Like there's in some of the sequels, I think it's sort of insinuated that they were also bullying him along with the other kids. So it's they were in charge of keeping him safe, and they victimized him.
It's you know what's interesting is they talk about there's rules with horror where people are very. You know, there's like there's the classic one of if you are not a virgin, you're marked for death, and these and I really think if the genre is called horror, you're supposed to horrify, but I feel like a lot of times it's not horrifying, it's just shocking, and I feel like if they wanted to be true horror, I would not want to see this, and that's why I'm saying this, where they go after good people who are not marked for death, like you would say, like, you know, that's one of the reasons why there are those murder cases that fascinate us, because in our minds these people weren't marked for death. You know, they weren't. You can't just go, oh, they were involved in drugs. So I mean, it's kind of expected.
I think the slasher series is a little bit of a byproduct of the 80s, because the shock came later. like every one of these series had something serious that they were talking about. Like the original Nightmare on Elm Street was actually based on a nightmare Wes Craven had. Like he came up with Freddie and all this stuff, like he dreamed about him. So there's that, and there's like this whole idea of like, what if this quiet community committed an atrocity even for the sake of their kids' safety, you know, but still went outside the law and murdered someone.
But remember
and then you've got Friday the 13th, where it's like, what if these, you know, kids that were supposed to be protecting this kid were actually, you know, caused him to die. You have a Halloween where it's like, what if this small child was literally like a sociopath and just had no feelings whatsoever. So like the thing about the slasher genre is the first movie always starts out as like a legitimately good movie. And that too, Friday the 13th actually has a twist ending that I won't get into if you haven't seen it, but that's the thing. Like all of the sequels, it was the 80s excess, this whole bigger, stupider, more shocking. And that was the thing. Like,
you know what's interesting? You mentioned about the town committed an atrocity, even though it was for the benefit of the children. Remember that case I had you watch a documentary about, Ken McElroy?
Yes, I do.
So, you know, going by the logic of this film, we as a society would be okay with him coming back as a slasher. Because even though he was essentially eliminated for the good of the general public, his death was still an atrocity. And I really don't own that case. I really can't argue. I'm not for a person who's like for capital punishment, but in that case, I can't really make an argument as to why. Because if you think of, they went through all the legal avenues they could, and they couldn't be free of this oppressor.
It's definitely a gray area. I think I
love gray areas.
It's like the whole two wrongs don't make a right sort of thing. And that's what makes it interesting, is that you really can't argue one way, because it's also like a ridiculous. It's like it comes back as a monster.
It's like why I could never serve on a jury for a civil case, because it's not ruled on evidence; it's ruled on the preponderance of evidence, which basically means
who has more evidence.
49%, basically ignore 49% of the evidence.
Exactly.
Which I can't do. I'm like, there's still a lot there.
I'd say if you're interested, check out the rest of the series, because they get into, like, you learn what Freddie's backstory is, where he came from, as far as, like, his mother's backstory, and I'll say that's pretty interesting and shocking as well.
I mean,
also, like, the details of why, because that's another thing, too. It's like, oh, how did the evidence... If I remember correctly, again, he worked at the power plant. He was, like, a boiler man, so he'd burn all the evidence. That's
also why there's that motif of the boiler and the fire that comes back. I did have a question, because you mentioned that whoever occupies his house
is always the main character.
It's always the main character. Now the question is does that person always occupy that specific bedroom? Because so it's not only my question is if, let's say, they just use that room for storage and no one slept in that room, do you think he'd move on to another room?
I don't, that's the thing too, is like, I don't think
I'm not trying to be nitpicky.
It's a legit question, because I don't think Freddie would sleep in that room. I would assume that he'd have the master bedroom. Usually the basement where he would hide all of his murder stuff, you know, the glove is still down there in every movie. And again, like the boiler is almost kind of a symbol. Yeah. So like, I think that's kind of where the heart of the evil is.
Okay.
So, no, I think if you're in the house, you're probably going to get affected.
Right.
I think he can kind of pick who he wants to pick, too, because in the first movie, unless I'm mistaken, the protagonist is an only child. In this one, you know, it's him and a little sister, but he's like I was
like ready. I was preparing myself for the gruesome death of the little sister. I'm glad that wasn't in the movie.
That was a good fake out. I definitely was like,
well, no, like not even just that scene. I was just like, okay, she's gonna be dead. Like 5 minutes in, because this girl's over here reading her cereal box. I'm like, that's too innocent.
This movie doesn't have that big of a kill count compared to some of the other ones, because there's some kids that get killed at the pool party, but other than like extras, I'm pretty sure it's just the coach and his bed buddy.
And he's his bed buddy. But even
BFF.
Even at the pool party, it was literally just like one person. If I remember, I mean, they make it look like it's a lot, but if you really look at the ones that are confirmed dead, there's only one who got slashed in the neck, and that's pretty much it.
I think at one point he makes the pool boil, so those kids might have been.
Well, everybody was out of the pool at that point.
Possibly. I need to go back.
Anyway. You know me. I'm very big on this whole collateral damage thing, so I pay attention to that.
But anyway, obviously, I recommend this movie. I just wanted to talk about it because I never see anyone else talking about it except your random BuzzFeed article, apparently.
But I mean, it was a great movie to talk about. There's a lot. It's a movie that it exceeds its genre, and it does have a lot to say, like you were talking about with. Basically, this movie essentially is a pushback against toxic masculinity, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I can
because
see
he talks about what scares these, frat bro type guys.
Questioning your sexuality in the 80s
in the 80s.
Biggest frat bro decade of all time. Yeah, no, I think this one doesn't get enough credit.
As an LGBT person, though, at least for that time, males being, essentially objectified wasn't as big of a thing. I did really appreciate that we got lots of not fully one time. There's
the male gaze, and then there's the male gaze.
The male gaze on males. I did really appreciate, and they were the biggest thing for we have the twink, which is the main character. We have the jock. The jock who is his friend body type. We had sort of the older man sort of muscly guy, which is the coach.
You got the dad bod.
We had the daddy bear at the end. It's almost like he was just trying. He wanted to play around with that a little too much because he made sure to hit all the tribes.
I really tried to find out as much as I could about Chaskin. For all I know, he might be gay. I know he's married. He's married with a kid, or kids. So I know, but that's the thing is like, he could be married with like a dog. I don't know. He might be. He might be a gay man. I don't know.
We don't know, and we are not encouraging people to invade his privacy to find out.
Yeah, because apparently he does have his own website, and he does actually. I believe he gives out like he teaches courses on screenwriting, and I believe he does like giveaways on his website as well. So I believe it's davidchaskin.com.
You too can own the swimsuit that guy wore.
But so he's still active on his website.
Even if he isn't gay, it's kind of interesting that you could even look at this to where, even though he was, I think, an adult, he was an adult at this point when he made this movie, but people do go through a sexual renaissance. So this he may have been while writing this questioning his own sexuality, and the fact that we scroll through all these different body types. Maybe he was just trying them all out, seeing which worked for him.
But would you recommend the movie?
I want to say yes. I want to say yes. I'm not sure it's a movie I would particularly watch again. Actually, no, I take that back. If it's on, I would watch this movie because it is fun, and horror is kind of weird for me. It's like I have to know what's happening. Once I know what's happening, then I can be like, okay, I can kind of watch this again. It's like if you were to be like, oh hey, Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is on, and I've never seen it before, I'd be like, no, I'm good. But like now that I know what's happening, I can watch. I would recommend it because it is interesting, even though it's not particularly my cup of tea. I can really appreciate the societal commentary that it is. According to the people who made it unintentionally there, and they're just completely unaware of it. But it's actually the way you've talked about it. It's actually quite genius the way it's done and it's carried out.
For a hastily put together sequel to a quote unquote piece of shit, I think it was pretty good. And I mean, it made a lot of money. So hey, 5 movies after this, they killed the series, but. It took a while. But what's your favorite slasher series? What's your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Please tell us in the comments.
I personally love it when I go to a department store and they are slashing those prices.
But let us know down in the comments. Thank you for joining us. If you liked what you saw, please click the like. If you want to hear more from us in the future,
and I would also say if you're a person who's considering getting into the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, maybe never seen it, maybe been a little apprehensive. From what I've heard about the first one, and this might be a nice sort of segue into the series because from what I know, it's not as graphic or disturbing as the first one. It's still pretty unsettling and, you know, horrorish. I don't know. I could be totally wrong.
The first one's not as like it's cool. I'd rather just say if you're interested, check it out. But it's not, especially by today's standards, it's not like going to like utterly horrify you. It's like the idea is scarier than what you actually see.
I'm still not sure if I want to welcome Freddie into the community. I'm kind of on the fence about that one.
Keep him away from my kids. But what did you think? What's your favorite slasher series? What's your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie? Please let us know in the comments if you liked what you heard. Give us a like if you want to hear more from us in the future. Click subscribe if you want the notifications. Hit the bell or don't.
Ding.
We're just happy to have you guys here.
Ding,
but thanks
ding.
for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, and we will catch you all in the next one.
All right, peace, guys.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited by Pat Mars and produced by Alejandro Castillo, with original artwork by Asa Sparza. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.